The massive doors of the Galactic War Crimes Tribunal creaked open with a sound that echoed through the vast chamber like thunder. Every seat was filled with representatives from dozens of alien species, their various forms creating a rainbow of colors and shapes that stretched as far as the eye could see. The air hummed with nervous energy as translators worked overtime, converting the murmurs and whispers into hundreds of different languages. Commander Vexala stepped through the doorway, and the entire chamber fell into complete silence. Presence alone was enough to make even the bravest warriors shift uncomfortably in their seats. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, his reptilian frame was covered in thick, dark green scales that caught the harsh artificial lights and threw them back like broken mirrors. What made everyone stare, however, were the scars. Deep gouges ran across his chest and arms, some still weeping, a clear fluid that indicated they had never properly healed. His 4 powerful arms, each ending in razor-sharp claws, trembled visibly. As he walked down the center aisle, the left side of his face bore a particularly nasty mark that ran from his temple to his jaw, pulling his mouth into a permanent grimace. But it was his eyes that truly unsettled the observers. Once, they had been the bright yellow of a confident predator. Now they were dim and haunted, darting nervously around the room as if expecting attack from any direction. As he approached the witness stand, several tribunal members noticed his unusual gait. Where Crinian warriors typically moved with fluid grace, Vexala limped heavily, favoring his right leg. His breathing was labored, creating a subtle wheezing sound that carried in the silence. When he finally reached the ceremonial speaking stone, an ancient artifact from the First Galactic Peace Treaty, his 4 arms shook so violently that he had to grip the edges to steady himself. High Arbiter Molden, a being whose species had presided over galactic justice for over 1,000 years, leaned forward in his floating chair. His translucent blue form pulsed with official authority as he spoke through the chamber's amplification system. "State your name and rank for the record," his voice boomed, causing several smaller species to cover their hearing organs. Vexala's mouth opened and closed several times before any sound emerged. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, forcing the chamber's audio systems to strain to pick up his words. "Commander Vexala, 3rd Fleet, Crinian Imperial Navy," he managed, his voice cracking like that of an adolescent. "Serial number Kreis, 7749 Delta. I led the assault on the human world's eastern continent, in the region they called Korea." The moment the word Korea left his lips, a ripple of movement passed through the assembled delegates. Whispered conversations broke out in dozens of languages. Several representatives from warrior species, beings who had never shown fear in their entire lives, visibly paled or displayed their species' equivalent of distress. Others leaned forward with morbid curiosity, having heard only fragments of rumors about what had happened in that particular theater of war. High Arbiter Molden raised one of his appendages, and the chamber fell silent again. "The tribunal acknowledges that this is the first detailed testimony we have received regarding the Korean conflict zone. Please proceed, Commander." Vexala's breathing became even more labored. He looked around the chamber, his yellow eyes wide with something that looked like panic. "The humans there, ... double quotes," he began, then stopped, his throat working soundlessly. "They had names like Hanwoo, Jihai, Dongmin. Such simple sounds, just combinations of basic syllables, that any species could pronounce." His claws scraped against the ancient stone, leaving visible marks in the supposedly indestructible material. "We studied their languages before the invasion. Our intelligence reported that these particular humans organized themselves into what they called families and communities. We thought this made them weak, too emotionally attached to fight effectively." A bitter laugh escaped his throat, a sound so broken that it made several observers flinch. "Those simple names became our nightmares. Every night, in whatever passes for sleep among the survivors, we hear them whispered in the darkness. Hyenwu, the human who taught us that dying can be a weapon. Jihai, who showed us that a mother's love can become the most terrifying force in the universe. Dongmin, who proved that even their children could become monsters when pushed too far. The chamber was so quiet now that the only sounds were the subtle hums of life support systems and the occasional creak of someone shifting in their seat. Vextal seemed to draw strength from their attention, his voice growing slightly stronger. "We thought we were fighting primitives," he continued, his forearms gesturing weakly. "Our pre-invasion reports showed them using chemical propellants and metal projectiles, while we had plasma weapons and energy shields. Their cities had no orbital defenses, no energy barriers, no force fields. They built their structures from concrete and steel instead of molecularly bonded alloys. By every measure our strategists used, they were at least 500 years behind us technologically." His voice cracked again. "We were wrong, so terribly, catastrophically wrong." Vextel's breathing became ragged as he continued. "When our dropships descended through their atmosphere, their primitive aircraft tried to intercept us. We watched them burn and fall, thinking it was over before it began. Our first landing zone was in the center of their capital city, Seoul. The buildings were damaged from our preliminary bombardment, fires burned everywhere, and smoke filled the air." His claws dug deeper into the stone. We expected to find cowering survivors ready to surrender. Instead, as my transport touched down and the ramp lowered, a human female emerged from the rubble of a collapsed building. The chamber held its collective breath. Her name was Yunji. I know this because she told us, speaking in broken Krynian, that she must have learned from monitoring our communications. She was small, even by human standards, probably no taller than my chest. Her left arm was gone, torn away at the shoulder, with crude bandages wrapped around the wound. She should have been in shock, dying from blood loss. Vextel's voice dropped, barely above a whisper. Instead, she was smiling. Not the expression of fear or madness we expected, but genuine happiness. In her remaining hand, she carried a bottle made of green glass, filled with some kind of liquid that glowed with its own light. Later we learned they called it a Soju Bottle, a container for some kind of recreational beverage they had converted into a weapon. The silence in the chamber was so complete that several delegates unconsciously held their breath. As my entire squad advanced on her, she raised the bottle like a toast and said something in her language. Our translators later told us it meant "Welcome to Earth." Then she threw it. Vexel's forearms began shaking uncontrollably. Liquid fire that erupted consumed everything within 50 meters. But she didn't run. She stood there, still smiling as the flames reached her. As my soldiers screamed and died around me, as their armor melted and their weapons exploded from the heat, she looked directly at me and nodded, as if approving of our pain. The chamber stirred uneasily, with several representatives making religious gestures or defensive postures specific to their species. "That smile," Vexel whispered, his voice barely audible, even with amplification. "I see it every time I close my eyes." The expression of someone who had found exactly what they were looking for. She wasn't defending her city or her people. She was teaching us our first lesson about what humans become when you threaten their world. His scarred face looked up at the tribunal members, his dim yellow eyes reflecting the harsh lights. And that was just the beginning. Vextel's massive frame shuddered as his second heart began beating faster, creating a rhythmic pounding that echoed through the silent chamber. The Krynian respiratory system was designed for high-stress combat situations, but even now, 3 years after the war, his body betrayed the trauma that still lived within him. "My Lieutenant Kalinos was the finest warrior our species had ever produced," he began, his voice carrying a mixture of pride and devastating loss. He had survived the Zephyrian Rebellion, the Crystal Wars of Andromeda, and personally led the conquest of 7 different worlds. 300 years of military service, he had never lost a single engagement. His tactical brilliance was legendary throughout the Third Fleet. The commander paused, his forearms trembling as he gripped the speaking stone. On day 3 of the Korean campaign, our orbital scanners detected a significant human presence in the underground tunnel systems. Beneath the coastal city of Busan, Intelligence suggested they were using the subway networks and maintenance tunnels as supply routes and command centers. Kalunos volunteered to lead the extraction mission personally. Several tribunal members leaned forward, recognizing the tactical significance. Underground warfare was considered one of the most challenging forms of combat, requiring specialized equipment and extensive training. The Krenians were experts at it. We deployed with full combat gear, Vexala continued, his voice growing stronger as he recalled the technical details. Plasma rifles set to maximum dispersion, energy shields calibrated for close-quarters combat, and bioscanners capable of detecting human life signs through 30 meters of solid concrete. Kalunos had studied every available schematic of their tunnel systems, memorized every junction and access point. His claws scraped against the stone as his grip tightened. The insertion went perfectly. Our breach charges opened 3 simultaneous entry points, and our teams moved through the tunnels with precision timing. Within 2 hours, we had the entire network mapped and secured, or so we thought. Vexala's breathing became more labored. The humans had been waiting for us, not hiding, not cowering in fear like every other species we had encountered. They were waiting with the patience of natural predators. We found them in the deepest section of the network, in what appeared to be an abandoned maintenance chamber. Chamber was so quiet that the subtle hum of the translation system seemed almost loud. Every representative was hanging on his words, many having never heard first-hand accounts of human combat tactics. There were 12 of them, the commander whispered. Men, women, even what appeared to be adolescents by their species standards. They were armed with primitive kinetic weapons and improvised explosives, nothing that should have posed a threat to our advanced armor and shields. Their leader was a male named Jae-Sung, maybe 40 years by human reckoning, with scars across his face that suggested he had survived previous combat. Vexala's voice dropped even lower. When our scanning beams illuminated them, they didn't scatter or panic. Instead, they formed a defensive circle, placing the younger humans in the center. Jae-Sung stepped forward and slowly raised both hands. Above his head, in what every species recognizes as a gesture of surrender, the alien commander's 4 eyes closed briefly, as if he could still see the scene playing out before him. Kalunos was cautious, but followed standard protocol. He approached with his weapon lowered but ready, his energy shield at quarter power to show good faith while maintaining protection. The other humans remained motionless, their own weapons placed on the ground in clear view. Everything seemed normal. Vexala continued, his voice beginning to crack. A textbook surrender situation. Kalunos was within 3 meters when Jae-Sung smiled. Not the expression of fear or defeat we expected, but something else entirely. Something that made my warrior instincts scream warnings, but by then it was too late. The commander's breathing became rapid and shallow. Jae-Sung said something in their language. His voice was calm, almost peaceful, like he was saying a prayer. Later, when we analyzed the audio recordings, our linguists told us the words meant for the ancestors, but in that moment, all I understood was the look of absolute certainty in his eyes. Vexala's claws dug deep grooves into the ancient stone. The explosion wasn't like anything in our combat manuals. Human engineering, we learned, approaches problems differently than any other species, where we would use focused energy bursts or plasma charges. They had created something much more primitive, but infinitely more devastating. His voice rose slightly, gaining intensity from the memory. The entire tunnel network had been rigged with what they called daisy-chained explosives. Jae-Sung hadn't just been preparing to die, he'd been preparing to bring down over 2 kilometers of underground infrastructure, creating a massive sinkhole that would consume everything above ground as well. Several tribunal members made sounds of disbelief. The engineering required for such destruction would take months of preparation and extensive knowledge of structural vulnerabilities. 30 of our finest warriors died in that blast. Vexala whispered. Kalunos, my closest friend for over 2 centuries, was vaporized instantly. The humans didn't just die with him. They had planned for this exact scenario, prepared for it, welcomed it. The chamber stirred uneasily as the implications became clear. Oh, this wasn't random violence or desperate last stands. This was calculated tactical sacrifice. But that wasn't the worst part, the commander continued, his voice growing hollow. As our rescue team sifted through the rubble, we discovered that one of the humans, a female named So Young, had been broadcasting everything through their primitive communication networks. She had positioned herself with a clear line of sight to the surrender, and other human cells throughout the region had watched the entire event in real time. Vexala looked directly at the tribunal members, his dim yellow eyes reflecting a mixture of horror and grudging respect. They weren't just watching their own people die, they were cheering, celebrating the tactical information they had gained from the sacrifice. We intercepted dozens of their transmissions afterward, humans analyzing every detail of how we moved, how we communicated, how we reacted under pressure. His forearms began gesturing wildly as the memories flooded back. They studied our tactical formations, the timing of our communications, the range of our weapons, the limitations of our energy shields. Jae-sung and his unit hadn't died in vain. They had died as teachers, showing other human cells exactly how to kill us more effectively. The commander's voice cracked completely. But even that wasn't the end of the horror we found in those tunnels. As our engineering teams cleared the debris, they discovered something that changed everything we thought we knew about human psychology and determination. Vexala paused, seeming to gather strength for what came next. Hidden in sealed chambers throughout the tunnel network, we found laboratories, crude by our standards, but functional. The humans had been experimenting with our technology, reverse engineering, our bioplasma weapons and medical systems. His breathing became ragged. A female named Hai-jin had been the lead researcher. We found her personal logs, recorded in broken Crinian, that she had taught herself by studying our captured equipment. I'd been systematically injecting herself. With combinations of human blood and our bioplasma technology, the chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. Bioplasma was highly toxic to most species, designed specifically for Crinian physiology. Direct injection would cause excruciating death. Within hours, she was dying slowly, documenting every stage of the process, Vexala whispered. But she wasn't just conducting random experiments. She was weaponizing her own biology, creating a hybrid virus that would target our respiratory system specifically. Her own suffering and death were just data points in a larger project. His claws left deep scratches in the stone as his grip tightened. The logs showed that she had been in communication with human scientists around the globe, sharing her research, teaching others to replicate her work. She knew she would die, but she also knew that her death would contribute to a weapon that could kill thousands of our warriors. Vexala's voice rose to a shout that echoed through the chamber. Don't you understand? The humans weren't just fighting us, weren't just defending their territory or their families. They were learning to kill us more efficiently with every single battle, every casualty, every encounter. The alien commanders? Massive frames sagged as the intensity left him. Every human death was a lesson. Every sacrifice was a laboratory experiment. Every act of apparent desperation was actually calculated research designed to find better ways to destroy us. His final words came out as barely a whisper. They turned their entire species into a learning machine focused on one single objective, making us regret we had ever found their world. By the fourth week of the Korean campaign, Vexala's forces had suffered losses that would have broken the morale of any other military unit in the galaxy. But the Crinian Empire had not conquered 17 star systems by accepting defeat easily. High Command ordered a complete tactical restructuring, bringing in fresh reinforcements and the most advanced scanning technology available. We convinced ourselves that we were finally gaining the upper hand, Vexala said, his voice taking on the hollow tone of someone recounting a nightmare. Our orbital bombardment had reduced most of the major cities to rubble. Our ground forces controlled all major transportation routes, according to every tactical analysis. The humans should have been completely cut off from supply lines and communication networks. He paused, his forearms trembling as he recalled the false sense of security. Intelligence reports suggested that the remaining human resistance had been pushed into the southern provinces. Concentrated around the city of Daegu, our scanners detected a significant concentration of life signs in that area, along with electromagnetic signatures that suggested they were still operating communication equipment. The commander's scarred face twisted into what might have been a smile on a less damaged being. The resistance leader in that region was a human male named Taeho. Our intelligence files described him as a former military officer in their planetary defense force, approximately 35 years old by human standards. He had been coordinating attacks against our supply convoys with remarkable effectiveness. Vexel's breathing became labored as he continued. For 3 days, we intercepted his communications to other resistance cells. His tactical knowledge was impressive for a primitive species, but his patterns were predictable. Our cryptography. Teams had broken most of their communication codes, and our strategic computers had mapped his likely movement patterns with 93% accuracy. The alien commander's claws scraped against the stone floor as he shifted his weight. On the 4th day, we deployed our entire reserve force to surround his suspected position. 12,000 Krinian warriors supported by orbital bombardment platforms and atmospheric fighters. It was supposed to be the final engagement of the Korean theater. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. That morning, Taeho sent us a message through our own communication systems, not through captured equipment or jury-rigged transmitters, but directly through our secure military channels. Our communications officers initially thought it was impossible, but the message was verified as authentic. Several tribunal members exchanged glances. Penetrating Krinian military communications required not just advanced technology, but intimate knowledge of their encryption protocols and security procedures. The message was brief. Vexel continued, his 4 eyes closing as if he could still hear the words. He said, "Come and take it," in perfect High Krinian. Using the formal challenge phrase that our warriors have spoken before battle for over 1,000 years, his pronunciation was flawless, his understanding of the cultural context complete. The commander's voice cracked. We learned later, through interrogation of captured human civilians, that Taeho had been holding several of our captured pilots for weeks, but he wasn't torturing them for military information or strategic intelligence. He was forcing them to teach him our language, our customs, our military traditions. Vexel stood abruptly, his massive frame swaying slightly as he began pacing within the small witness area. The movement seemed to help him focus, as if the physical activity could somehow ease the mental burden of his memories.
"Ill assault
Began at dawn," he said, his voice gaining strength from the familiar territory of tactical recounting. Our forces moved in perfect coordination, using standard containment protocols that had succeeded on dozens of other worlds. Atmospheric support cleared the approach routes while ground forces advanced from 3 directions simultaneously. Pacing became more agitated. Humans put up token resistance at the outer perimeter, exactly as our battle computers had predicted. Small arms fire, improvised explosives, the kind of desperate last stand we had seen from other species. Our shields deflected their primitive weapons easily, and our plasma rifles cut through their defensive positions like they were made of paper. Vexel stopped pacing and gripped the edge of the witness stand. Within 6 hours, we had breached their final stronghold, a reinforced concrete structure that had once been some kind of government building. Our sensors detected only minimal life signs inside, suggesting that most of the resistance fighters had already fled or been eliminated. His breathing became rapid and shallow. The advance team, led by Captain Zorthok, one of our most experienced urban warfare specialists, entered the building expecting to find either empty rooms or a few terrified survivors. Instead, they found something that none of our training had prepared us for. The chamber was completely silent. Every representative focused entirely on his words. Sitting in what had once been a conference room, at a polished wooden table that looked completely untouched by the war raging outside, was a single human female. She appeared to be middle-aged by their standards, maybe 50 years old, with graying hair neatly arranged and wearing clean civilian clothing that looked like it had just been pressed. Vexthal's voice became almost dreamlike, as if he were describing a vision rather than a memory. Her name was Mi Young. She looked up as our warriors entered, smiled warmly, and greeted them in fluent Krinian. Not the broken, accented speech we had heard from other human prisoners, but perfect pronunciation with proper grammatical structure. His 4 arms began shaking violently. The table was set for tea. Delicate ceramic cups, a steaming pot, small plates with what appeared to be local pastries. She gestured to empty chairs around the table and invited our warriors to sit, explaining that she had been waiting for them and had prepared refreshments in honor of their arrival. The commander's scarred face contorted with remembered anguish. Captain Zorthok was suspicious, but the human female seemed genuinely peaceful. She spoke about her family, her home, asked polite questions about Krynian culture and customs. Our warriors began to relax, thinking they had finally encountered a human who understood the futility of resistance. Vexthal's voice cracked completely. She served the tea herself, pouring carefully from the ceramic pot, explaining that it was a traditional Korean beverage made from local plants. She drank first, sipping from her own cup, while maintaining pleasant conversation. Our soldiers, following basic diplomatic protocol, accepted the refreshment. His next words came out, as barely a whisper. Within minutes, Captain Zorthok and his entire team were convulsing on the floor. Their respiratory systems were shutting down, their nervous systems firing randomly. But Myung continued drinking her tea, continued smiling, as if nothing unusual was happening. The chamber stirred uneasily as the implications became clear. The tea was poisoned, Vexal continued, his voice hollow, but not with any compound from their primitive chemistry. Analysis later showed it contained a mixture of human caffeine, processed through their digestive systems and combined with components from our own medical supplies. She had been experimenting with our biochemistry, learning exactly how our species would react to specific toxins. His forearms gestured helplessly. But Myung had been drinking the same tea. She was dying along with our warriors, her own bodies succumbing to the same poison. And she was smiling, actually smiling, as her life drained away. Vextal's final words echoed through the chamber like a death knell. As our soldiers died around her, she kept talking. "My son Wujin is watching from the mountains," she said, her voice growing weaker, but never losing its gentle tone. "Tomorrow, he'll teach others. The entire siege, the weeks of preparation, the tactical maneuvering. All of it had been an elaborate trap designed not to kill us, but to study how we reacted to their toxins." The alien commander collapsed back into his seat, his massive frame shaking. She died still smiling, still talking about her son, while our warriors convulsed around her. And somewhere in the mountains, her child was watching, learning, preparing to turn our deaths into lessons for the next generation of human fighters. Vexthal's massive frame collapsed back into his seat with a sound like grinding stone, his forearms trembling so violently that several tribunal members visibly flinched. The scarred alien commander sat in silence for nearly a full minute, his breathing creating a rhythmic wheeze that echoed through the chamber's perfect acoustics. "Everything changed in month 2, he finally whispered, his voice carrying a weight that seemed to press down on every being present. Up until that point, we had been fighting a defensive war against the humans. They attacked our positions, sabotaged our supply lines, conducted guerrilla raids against our patrols. Standard resistance tactics that we had encountered on dozens of conquered worlds. His four eyes, dim and haunted, swept across the assembled tribunal members. But then something shifted in their strategy. Our intelligence networks began receiving reports from across the entire Korean peninsula that made no tactical sense. Humans were no longer just defending their territory or protecting their population centers. They had begun actively hunting us. The commander's claws scraped against the witness stand as he gripped it for support. The first indication came from patrol groups in the northern mountain regions. Squad leaders reported feeling like they were being watched during routine reconnaissance missions. Our bioscanners would detect human life signs at the extreme edge of their range. Always moving, always staying just beyond direct contact. Vexal's breathing became more labored as he continued. Initially, we dismissed these reports as paranoia or equipment malfunction. The stress of fighting humans had already begun affecting our warriors' psychological state. But then patrol. Unit Gamma 7 disappeared entirely during what should have been a simple supply run through a supposedly cleared valley. His voice gained intensity as the memories flooded back. We found them 3 days later, alive but completely unresponsive. All 12 warriors were sitting in perfect formation around their disabled transport, staring at the sky with expressions of absolute terror. Their weapons were untouched, their equipment undamaged, but they couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't even acknowledge our presence. Several tribunal members leaned forward, recognizing the tactical implications. Psychological warfare was considered one of the most sophisticated forms of combat, requiring detailed understanding of enemy psychology and extensive preparation. The patrol leader, Sergeant Kylethon, eventually recovered enough to give us a partial report. Vexala continued, his forearms beginning to gesture as he spoke. He described being tracked for over 18 hours by what he called ghost humans, who moved through the forest without making sound, without leaving tracks, without triggering any of our motion sensors. The commander's scarred face twisted into an expression of remembered horror. Gosh, these humans, led by a male named Sunjo, had been studying our patrol patterns for weeks. They knew our standard formation distances, our communication protocols, even the specific times when we would stop for rest and equipment checks. They had turned the entire mountain region into a hunting ground, and we were the prey. Vexala stood abruptly, his massive frame swaying as he began pacing within the witness area. The movement seemed to help him focus, though his voice remained strained and broken. Sungho had formed what they called a tiger unit, he said, the alien word sounding strange when pronounced through his reptilian vocal cords. We learned later that this was a reference to an apex predator from their world, a creature that hunts alone and strikes without warning. But these human tigers hunted in coordinated packs, using tactics that our military academies had never encountered. His pacing became more agitated, his claws clicking against the chamber floor with each step. They would track our patrols for days at a time, learning our individual behavior patterns, identifying our leaders, mapping our psychological weak points. Then they would strike, but not to kill. That was what made it so terrifying. They attacked to wound, to capture, to study. The commander stopped pacing and gripped the edge of the witness stand until his knuckles showed white. Our wounded warriors would disappear for days at a time, then reappear in locations far from where they had been taken. They were always alive, always physically intact, but mentally they were destroyed, completely broken. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Sungho's people had been conducting experiments on our captured soldiers. They had somehow obtained samples of human adrenaline, the chemical compound their species produces during combat stress. They were injecting our warriors with concentrated doses, forcing our nervous systems to experience human-level sensory input. Several tribunal members made sounds of disbelief. The physiological differences between species meant that such cross-contamination should have been impossible, let alone survivable. Cranian biology isn't designed to handle that level of sensory stimulation, Vexala explained, his forearms shaking as he spoke. Our nervous systems operate on completely different principles. When forced to process human-level adrenaline, our warriors experienced what could only be described as sensory overload. Colors became too bright, sounds became deafening even. Gentle touches felt like electric shocks. His voice cracked completely. Many of them went permanently insane. They couldn't function in normal environments anymore. The simplest tasks became overwhelming. We had to establish special medical facilities just to care for warriors who could no longer tolerate the basic sensory input of daily life. Vexala resumed his pacing, his movements becoming increasingly erratic. But even that wasn't the worst of what the humans did to us. The psychological experiments, the sensory overload, the systematic breakdown of our patrol structures, all of that was just preparation for something much more devastating. The chamber was completely silent. Every representative focused entirely. On his testimony, there was a human female named the Jean, he continued, his voice taking on a tone of grudging respect mixed with absolute terror. She had lost her family in our initial orbital bombardment of Seoul. Her husband, her 3 children, her elderly parents, all vaporized in the first wave of our assault. By every tactical analysis, she should have been broken, consumed by grief, incapable of effective resistance. His claws dug grooves into the stone floor as his grip tightened. Instead, she became something that our military training had never prepared us to face. She began systematically collecting biosignatures from our dead warriors, using their scent markers and genetic identifiers to create false identification profiles. The commander's 4 eyes closed briefly, as if the memory was too painful to face directly. Crinian military protocol relies heavily on biochemical identification. Our security systems, our access controls, even our social interactions are based on recognizing specific scent patterns and genetic markers. The Jinn had learned to replicate these perfectly. His voice rose to a shout that echoed through the chamber. She would walk directly into our command posts, wearing the biochemical signature of dead Crinian officers, carrying forged authorization codes, speaking perfect military Crinian with proper accent and terminology. Our own security systems would recognize her as a legitimate member of our command structure? Massel's massive frame began shaking uncontrollably. She assassinated 3 of my senior commanders before we even realized what was happening. Colonel Mordock, who had led the conquest of the vegan system, Major Zilthas, veteran of 40 different campaigns, Jerkon, one of our most promising young tactical officers. His voice broke into fragments. Each time she would complete the assassination and then leave a recording device for us to find. Not tactical information or demands for surrender, but personal messages. For Sun Q, she would say in her broken Crinian, naming one of her dead children. For Jin Ho. For Hanul, she would list their ages, their favorite activities, their dreams for the future. The alien commander collapsed back into his seat, his forearms hanging limply at his sides. She had turned her grief into a weapon that cut through our entire command structure. Every death was personal to her. Every assassination was an act of maternal vengeance. She made us understand that we weren't just fighting soldiers or even a military force. We were fighting an entire species that had been transformed by loss into something beyond our comprehension. His final words came out as barely a whisper that nonetheless carried clearly through the chamber's acoustics. The humans had stopped playing defense because they had realized something that terrified us more than any weapon. They had nothing left to lose. And that made them more dangerous than any force in the galaxy. The tribunal chamber had never experienced such absolute silence. Even the subtle hums of life support systems and translation equipment seemed to fade into nothingness as Vexala prepared to deliver his final testimony. His massive scarred frame sat hunched in the witness chair, for arms trembling with exhaustion and trauma that 3 years had done nothing to heal. Hi. Arbiter Molden leaned forward in his floating platform, his translucent blue form pulsing. With nervous energy, Commander, you have described tactical encounters and individual battles, but our records show that the Crinian Empire withdrew from Earth with over 60% of your invasion force still intact. What caused such a complete retreat when you still maintained numerical superiority? Vexala's dim yellow eyes looked up, meeting the Arbiter's gaze for the first time since his testimony began. When he spoke, his voice had become a rasp so broken that the chamber's audio systems had to amplify it to maximum levels, just to make his words audible. The war ended not because we chose to retreat, he whispered, each word seeming to cost him tremendous effort. It ended because we finally realized what the humans had done to us during those 2 months of fighting. In our final weeks on their world, we weren't fighting soldiers anymore. We weren't even fighting a military resistance movement. He paused, his breathing creating a rhythmic wheeze that echoed through the chamber. We were fighting an entire population that had evolved into something beyond our understanding. Beyond our tactical manuals, beyond anything our species had encountered in 1,000 years of conquest. The commander struggled to his feet one final time, his massive frame swaying as he gripped the witness stand for support. Several tribunal members unconsciously leaned back, intimidated even by his broken, defeated presence. The final message came on day 57 of the occupation, Vexala continued, his voice gaining a strange intensity as he recalled the moment that had changed everything. Our communications officers detected an incoming transmission on our primary command frequency, not from captured equipment or jury-rigged transmitters, but from our own orbital command ship. A ripple of shocked murmurs passed through the assembled delegates. Penetrating a military command ship's communications required not just advanced technology, but complete understanding of Krynian security protocols and access codes that were changed daily. The transmission came from a human male named Chanwu, the commander said, his forearms beginning to gesture as the memory consumed him. Our intelligence files identified him as a former university professor, specializing in what humans called linguistics, the study of language and communication. He appeared to be approximately 45 years old, with no military training or combat experience. Vexala's scarred face twisted into an expression that might have been admiration on a less damaged being. When his image appeared on our command screens, he was sitting in what appeared to be a simple classroom surrounded by books and educational materials. He looked directly into the camera and began speaking in perfect High Krynian, using formal military protocols that we hadn't taught to any prisoner. The alien commander's voice cracked as he continued. His pronunciation was flawless, his understanding of our cultural context complete. He used ceremonial phrases that only senior officers were supposed to know, diplomatic terminology that required years of study to master. But this human had learned it all in less than 2 months. The chamber was so quiet that individual breathing patterns from different species could be distinguished in the silence. Chanwu's message was brief but comprehensive. Vexala whispered. He said, "Honored warriors of the Krynian Empire, your invasion force arrived at our world 57 days ago. Your empire sent 300,000 warriors to conquer Earth, presenting the finest military minds and most advanced technology your species possesses." The commander's breathing became rapid and shallow as he recalled the human's words. Then he said something that made every warrior in our command structure stop what they were doing and listen with absolute attention. "We have studied every one of them. We know your weapons capabilities, your armor's weaknesses, your ships, defensive systems. We know your tactical preferences, your communication protocols, your medical vulnerabilities." Vexala's forearms began shaking violently. But that wasn't the part that broke us. Chanwu continued speaking, his voice remaining calm and professional, like he was delivering a university lecture. "We have also studied your cultural databases, accessed through your captured equipment. We know the locations of your home worlds, your colony systems, your manufacturing centers. We know your population distributions, your resource dependencies, your infrastructure vulnerabilities." The tribunal members began exchanging worried glances as the implications became clear. This wasn't just military intelligence gathering. This was comprehensive strategic analysis of an entire interstellar civilization. Then Chanwu said something that destroyed our species' will to fight, the commander continued, his voice rising to a desperate shout. He looked directly into the camera, smiled the same terrifying smile we had seen on human faces throughout the war, and said, "We are coming to visit you soon. We want to show you what we learned from your visit to us." Complete pandemonium erupted in the chamber. Representatives from dozens of species began shouting questions, making defensive gestures, or calling for emergency sessions of their respective governments. Several smaller species delegates actually fled the chamber. Entirely High Arbiter Molden raised all of his appendages, creating a display of bioluminescent patterns that commanded attention. Order in this tribunal. "Commander Vexala, are you stating that the humans made direct threats against Krynian civilian populations?" Vexala's scarred face turned toward the Arbiter, his dim eyes reflecting something that looked like bitter laughter. "Threats? No, honored Arbiter. Chanwu wasn't making threats. He was making promises. He was explaining exactly what humanity intended to do with all the information they had gathered during our occupation." The alien commander's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. After the transmission ended, our fleet commanders held an emergency session. We analyzed every word of Chanwu's message, every tactical implication, every strategic possibility. And we realized something that no conquering species had ever been forced to understand before. His forearms gestured helplessly. The humans hadn't been fighting to defend their world. They had been conducting the most comprehensive intelligence operation in galactic history. Every battle, every casualty, every act of resistance had been designed to gather information about our capabilities and weaknesses. Vexala looked directly at each tribunal member in turn. 3 cycles have passed since we withdrew from Earth. In that time, no Krinian ship has left our home system. Not because we lack courage or military capability, but because humans like Jin-A Kung-Su and Hyo-Jin taught us something that no species in galactic history had ever learned before. His breathing became labored as he prepared his final statement. They showed us what happens when you attack a species that has absolutely nothing left to lose. They demonstrated what warfare becomes when conducted by beings who view their own deaths as acceptable losses in service of a larger strategic objective. The commander's voice rose to fill the entire chamber. The humans of Korea didn't just wage war against us. They taught us what war truly means when waged by a species that has been pushed beyond the limits of survival, beyond the boundaries of normal psychology, beyond the constraints that keep civilized beings from becoming monsters. Vexala's massive frame began to collapse as the emotional weight of his testimony finally overwhelmed him. They didn't just defeat us on the battlefield. They made us too terrified to ever fight again. They turned our greatest strength, our ability to conquer and dominate other species, into our greatest weakness. His final words came out as a broken whisper that nonetheless carried clearly through the chamber's perfect acoustics. The humans didn't win a war. They redefined what warfare means in a galaxy where every species now knows that some enemies are too dangerous to make. Some worlds are too costly to conquer, and some species should never, ever be pushed to the point where they have nothing left to lose. Vexala collapsed completely into his seat, his forearms hanging limply as the chamber erupted into panicked conversations. Delegates from warrior species were frantically contacting their home worlds, while representatives from peaceful civilizations huddled together in obvious terror. High Arbiter Moldenus' translucent form flickered with patterns of deep concern as he realized that this testimony would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. Humanity had achieved something unprecedented. They had made themselves too terrifying to attack, too dangerous to ignore, and too unpredictable to understand. The tribunal session ended not with formal closure, but with the gradual exodus of representatives who suddenly had urgent business elsewhere in the galaxy, leaving behind only the echo of Vexala's broken voice and the terrifying knowledge that somewhere beyond the edge of known space, humanity was still learning, still growing, still preparing to teach the galaxy exactly what they had discovered about the true nature of war: the end.